"Mr. Chairman, she can barely afford groceries." My uncle dragged me to a city council hearing over our family's $54 million coastal acreage. The chairman smirked. "And she expects to manage a commercial development?" People laughed. Then I stood up and handed over a single folder. The chairman's smile vanished. Uncle Conrad hadn't spoken to me in 6 years. Didn't stop him from filing a hostile rezoning petition to strip me of the 400 acres my grandmother left behind in Oregon. She bought that coastline in 1974, running a conservation camp until she was 82. The local fishermen knew her by her first name, and she knew theirs. Conrad believed the property was his personal ATM. The oldest son, decades in real estate, schmoozing at the right country clubs. So when my grandmother started taking me on long hikes, showing me the ecological surveys and explaining the original land patents, my uncle never noticed. I was 26 the first time she showed me the water rights charter. We were sitting on her porch in the rain, 2 mugs of cheap tea between us. She handed me a sealed envelope and said, "This gets filed if anyone tries to pave over the springs." She died 3 years later, left my uncle as the primary executor, left me something quieter, something Conrad didn't know about. For 12 years, I didn't touch it. I just watched. My uncle is good at 2 things: looking wealthy and destroying capital. Within 5 years, he'd leveraged the estate to fund disastrous strip malls in Nevada. He hid the defaulting loans in shell companies. I'm a substitute teacher. I make $38,000 a year. I drive a 2008 Hyundai with a dented bumper and shop at discount grocery stores. My apartment is a basement unit that floods every spring. My uncle's lobbyists later described it as a substandard living environment. The council members chuckled at that part. But every weekend, I was at the state archives, cross-referencing soil samples against the federal environmental protections my grandmother had taught me to navigate. 5 years of documentation in a fireproof box. I was just paying attention. Conrad filed an expedited application to bulldoze the coastline into a luxury golf resort. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had anticipated this. The water rights charter wasn't just a historical document. It was a tripwire. It only triggered if a commercial entity attempted to alter the watershed. Conrad filed on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had submitted the geological activation papers to the Federal Wildlife Board. The morning of the hearing, I put on my only decent cardigan and parked 4 blocks away to avoid the $18 municipal garage fee. The council chambers were packed. My uncle's side had 3 corporate lawyers. Conrad wore a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than my annual rent. His lead developer spoke first, presenting a massive 3D model. My uncle was the visionary entrepreneur. I was the estranged niece clinging to the past. The developer used the phrase financial illiteracy twice. Then my uncle stepped up to the microphone. "Mr. Chairman," he sighed, "my niece can barely afford groceries." The room laughed, a ripple of condescending chuckles echoing off the high ceilings. The chairman leaned forward. "And she expects to manage a commercial development of this scale?" The investors in the front row roared. I sat there with my hands in my lap, my expression blank. I had spent 5 years preparing for this exact Tuesday. The chairman peered down at me. "Miss Whitmore, do you have any actual defense to offer?" I reached into my tote bag and handed a certified dossier to the clerk. "I am the appointed steward of the Tillamook Aquifer Trust," I said loudly. "My grandmother registered the subterranean water rights 12 years ago. The trust activated the second my uncle filed for commercial excavation." The chairman skimmed the first page, his face going pale, and handed it to the city attorney. My uncle stammered. "That's a fabrication." "Mr. Whitmore," the city attorney said, not looking up. "This application triggered a federal injunction. The entire 400 acres is now permanently classified as a protected ecological sanctuary. Your development rights are voided as of 8 a.m. today." My uncle spun to face his lead investor. The investor was already walking out the double doors. The silence that followed wasn't shocked or dramatic. It was just the heavy, awkward quiet of a room full of expensive people realizing they had wasted their morning. The chairman cleared his throat, shuffled the papers into a messy stack, and muttered something about adjourning the session. I didn't stick around to watch Conrad's face fully deflate. I packed my canvas tote, zipped my raincoat, and walked down the center aisle. A few of the junior lawyers wouldn't make eye contact with me. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the council building and stepped out into the Oregon drizzle. Walking those 4 blocks to my car felt different. My boots hit the pavement with a solid, grounding rhythm. For 12 years, I had carried the weight of my grandmother's secret. Now it was out. The land was safe. I got to my Hyundai, climbed in, and sat behind the steering wheel for a long time without putting the key in the ignition. The windshield fogged up with my breath. I let myself have exactly 1 minute of relief. Just one. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. No area code I was familiar with. "Your grandmother left a second envelope. It's about your uncle's shell companies. Meet me tomorrow, and bring the fireproof box." I stared at the glowing screen. The rain drummed hard against the roof of the car. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything back. Very few people knew about the fireproof box. I kept it under the floorboards in my bedroom closet. The only person who had ever seen it was the bank teller who notarized my grandmother's original trust documents, and he had died of a stroke 6 years ago. I drove home. The heater in my car only blew lukewarm air, so my hands were numb by the time I pulled into the gravel driveway behind my apartment building. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside, and immediately smelled the dampness. The spring thaw was seeping into the drywall again. I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to the bedroom, pulled back the cheap synthetic rug, pried up the loose floorboard, and hauled the heavy steel lockbox onto my mattress. I opened it. The folders were there. The geological surveys, the trust charter. But lying flat at the bottom, underneath a stack of old property tax receipts, was a thick manila envelope I had never opened. My grandmother had handed handed me the box the week before she passed. She told me about the first envelope, the water rights. She never mentioned a second one. My phone buzzed again. Same number. Blackwood Diner on 4th, 6 a.m. Ask for Arlo. I didn't sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table, drinking tap water, watching the clock on the stove blink toward morning. At 5:30, I put the manila envelope into my tote bag. I left the heavy fireproof box behind. I wasn't about to lug a steel safe into a public restaurant, but I locked the floorboard back in place. The Blackwood Diner was an old aluminum siding joint that catered mostly to long-haul truckers and local insomniacs. At 6 in the morning, it smelled like burnt coffee and pine sol. I walked in and scanned the booths. Sitting in the far corner, nursing a ceramic mug, was a man in his late 60s. He wore a faded corduroy jacket and had a stack of legal pads sitting next to his plate of untouched eggs. I slid into the booth across from him. He didn't look surprised. Tess, he said. His voice was gravelly, quiet. Who are you? I asked. Arlo Beckett, he said. He took a slow sip of his coffee. I was your grandmother's forensic accountant, up until the day she died. I kept my hands folded on the Formica table. My grandmother didn't have a forensic accountant. She had a guy at H&R Block who did her taxes for $100. Arlo smiled. It was a sad, tired smile. That's what she told Conrad. That's what she told everyone. Your grandmother ran a conservation camp, Tess, but she wasn't a fool. When Conrad started asking for loans against the property 20 years ago, she hired me to quietly look into his businesses. She wanted to know exactly what kind of man she was leaving her estate to. And she found out he was building a house of cards. Those strip malls in Nevada, they were never meant to succeed. They were loss leaders. He was bleeding the construction loans dry, funneling the cash into offshore holding companies, and letting the domestic LLCs default. He's been doing it for a decade. I shook my head. That doesn't matter anymore. The land is locked in the trust. He can't touch it. The federal injunction voided his development rights. I know, Arlo said. I was watching the council livestream. You did exactly what she trained you to do. You saved the acreage. He leaned forward, pushing his coffee mug aside. But you didn't save the access. I frowned. What are you talking about? Arlo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded county map. He spread it flat on the table. He tapped a thick red line running parallel to the coastline, cutting straight through the dense pine forest leading to my grandmother's property. The main road, Arlo said. County Route 11. It's the only vehicle access to the 400 acres. When your grandmother bought the land in '74, the county owned the road. But 12 years ago, the county went broke and privatized the infrastructure maintenance. They auctioned off the easements. A cold, sinking feeling started in my stomach. Who bought it? A holding company called Vanguard Logistics, Arlo said, which is a subsidiary of a real estate group in Nevada, which is wholly owned by Conrad Whitmore. Arlo tapped the red line again. Conrad owns the road. Tess, he didn't just want to build a golf course. He wanted to own the perimeter. And 3 days ago, right before he filed the rezoning petition, he leveraged that easement to a private equity firm in Chicago for $4 million. I stared at the map. He took out a loan against the road. A high-interest, short-term balloon loan, Arlo corrected. He expected the golf course approval to go through yesterday. With that approval, the land value would spike, he'd secure institutional funding, and pay off the Chicago firm. But you blew up the golf course. So he defaults on the loan, I said. Exactly, he defaults. By the end of the month, the Chicago firm seizes the collateral. They take ownership of the road. And private equity firms don't care about ecological sanctuaries. They care about extracting value. They will put a toll gate at the top of Route 11. They will charge the Tillamook Aquifer Trust $10,000 a month for access. When the trust can't pay, and it can't because it has no revenue, they will place a lien on the sanctuary and force a liquidation sale to cover the unpaid access fees. I felt the blood drain from my face. The diner suddenly felt too hot. The smell of the pine sol was making me nauseous. I had spent 5 years preparing for a frontal assault. I had memorized water charters and soil acidity levels. I never looked at the asphalt leading to the front gate. Conrad knew this, I whispered. He knew if the rezoning failed, he still had a chokehold on the property. Conrad is a parasite, Arlo said simply. But he's a clever one. He built a fail-safe. Arlo looked at the tote bag in my lap. Did you bring the envelope? I reached into the bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope. I placed it on the table between us. Open it, he said. I tore the heavy paper flap. Inside was a stack of legal documents, older than the trust papers. The pages were slightly yellowed at the edges. I pulled them out and read the top sheet. It was a corporate promissory note. What is this? I asked. 10 years ago, Conrad's first major Nevada LLC went bankrupt, Arlo explained. He owed a local credit union $2 million. The credit union was going to liquidate his personal assets. Your grandmother couldn't stand to see her son go to prison for fraud, so she bailed him out. She bought the debt from the credit union, quietly, through a proxy. I read the names on the document. There was Conrad's signature, messy and sprawling, and beneath it, the proxy holder, Coralie Whitmore. I stopped breathing. The diner faded into background noise. The clatter of plates, the hum of the neon sign in the window, all of it just dropped away. Coralie, my mother. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed the papers back across the table. No, absolutely not. Tess, Arlo started. She hasn't been part of this family in 14 years, I said, my voice rising slightly. She walked out when I was in middle school. She moved to Arizona with a pool contractor and never looked back. My grandmother wouldn't use her for this. They hated each other. They didn't hate each other, Arlo said gently. Your grandmother understood Coralie. She knew Coralie was legally severed from Conrad's immediate business dealings, which made her the perfect proxy to hold the debt without triggering IRS flags. Your grandmother paid Coralie $50,000 to sign that paper and hold the debt in her name. I stared at the signature. signature. The loopy C, the sharp W. It was her handwriting. The last time I saw that handwriting, it was on a post-it note stuck to the refrigerator, telling me there was leftover lasagna in the Tupperware. What does this have to do with the road? I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. Conrad never paid the debt back, Arlo said, because he thought the proxy was just some anonymous shell company. He didn't know his own mother was behind it, and he certainly didn't know his ex-sister-in-law held the paper. That debt is still active. With interest, Conrad owes Corley's proxy entity roughly $3.8 million. If you call in that debt today, you can force Vanguard Logistics into receivership before the Chicago equity firm seizes the road. I looked at Arlo. You want me to foreclose on my uncle? I want you to use his own rotting debt to take the access road back, Arlo said. If the trust owns the road, the sanctuary is sealed forever. No one can ever touch it. Then let's do it. File the paperwork. Arlo sighed. He looked down at his cold eggs. I can't. I'm just an accountant. The debt is held in Coralie's name. She's the only one who can legally execute the call option. He looked back up at me. You need your mother's signature, Tess, in person, notarized, and you have 14 days before the Chicago firm forecloses on the easement. I grabbed the papers, shoved them back into the envelope, and stood up. The legs of the chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. I'm not doing it, I said. I'll find another way. I'll get an environmental injunction on the road. I'll sue the county for improper auction. Tess, there is no time. I am not asking that woman for anything, I said. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my tote bag. Thank you for the coffee, Arlo. I walked out of the diner before he could say another word. The rain had stopped, leaving the morning air heavy and damp. I got into my car and drove to the middle school where I was subbing for a 7th grade earth science class. I spent the next 7 hours teaching 12-year-olds about sedimentary rock layers, while my own foundation felt like it was cracking open. When the final bell rang at 3:15, I stayed in the empty classroom, wiping down the whiteboards. I was trying not to think about the map Arlo had shown me, the red line cutting through the trees, the toll gate, the slow, quiet death of the sanctuary my grandmother had built. My phone rang. It wasn't an unknown number this time. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen on my screen in 6 years. Uncle Conrad. I put the dry erase marker down on the tray. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Hello, I said. You think you're very smart, don't you, Tess? His voice didn't have the booming theatrical quality it had at the council meeting. It was low, thin, like a wire pulled too tight. I think I followed the law, I said. You humiliated me in front of the board of directors, he said. You cost me an 8-figure development deal. People in my circle don't take kindly to being made to look like fools by a substitute teacher who buys her clothes at Goodwill. The land wasn't yours to sell, Conrad. He let out a short, dry laugh. You don't understand how any of this works. You read a few books in the archives and you think you're playing the game. I just got off the phone with my attorneys. Good for you. Tell them the federal injunction is airtight. Oh, I know it is, Conrad said. But your personal bank accounts aren't. We just filed a civil suit against you in county court. Tortious interference with a prospective business advantage. Breach of implied fiduciary duty to the estate. We're asking for $12 million in damages. My stomach dropped. You don't have a case. I was acting as the steward of the trust. I don't need a case, Tess, he said, his voice dropping into a vicious, satisfied purr. I just need a judge to sign an ex parte order freezing your assets pending discovery, which he did about 10 minutes ago. Have you checked your checking account lately? I pulled the phone away from my ear, put it on speaker, and quickly opened my banking app. The screen loaded. Available balance, 0 pence hold status, legal freeze, / pending adjudication. I had $412 in that account. It was supposed to cover my rent next week. You froze my account, I whispered. I froze everything, Conrad said through the speaker. Your checking, your savings, your car insurance auto pay. You can't buy a gallon of milk right now. You can't put gas in that piece of trash you drive. This is illegal. You're retaliating. I'm litigating, he corrected. By the time you find a pro bono lawyer willing to fight this, you'll have been evicted from your flooded basement. You'll be sleeping in your car, assuming it doesn't get repossessed. He paused, letting the silence hang in the empty classroom. Drop the trust claim, Tess. Sign the waiver dissolving the sanctuary status. Do it by Friday, and I'll drop the suit. I'll even write you a check for $50 grand. You can buy a nicer apartment. I looked at the zero balance on my screen. I thought about the 400 acres of old growth pine. I thought about my grandmother, sitting on the porch, handing me the box. Go to hell, Conrad, I said. Suit yourself, he replied, and hung up. I stood in the quiet classroom for a long time. The smell of the whiteboard marker was giving me a headache. I had no money. I couldn't buy groceries on the way home. I couldn't pay my electric bill. Conrad had suffocated me in a matter of hours, using the legal system like a blunt instrument. He thought he had backed me into a corner where I had to surrender. He didn't know about the red line on the map. He didn't know about the $3 million in rotting debt. And he didn't know that my mother held the match that could burn his entire financial life to the ground. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled down to the C's. I hadn't called the number in 8 years. I didn't even know if it was still active. I hit dial and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, a click. Hello, a voice said. It was raspy, older than I remembered, with a faint trace of a desert drawl. Hi, Mom, I said. There was a long, terrible pause on the other end of the line. I could hear a television playing in the background somewhere. Tess, she breathed. I need to see you, I said. I'm coming to Arizona. Are you out of your mind? She said, the shock in her voice hardening into a defensive edge. It's a 20-hour drive. You don't even know where I live. Then tell me, I said, leaning against the whiteboard. Tess, I'm at work in 20 minutes. I don't have time for a reunion. This isn't a reunion, I said. This is a legal emergency. Conrad just froze my bank accounts. He's going to seize the access road to the Tillamook acreage by the end of the month month if I don't stop him. Conrad? She let out a dry, humorless laugh. You're fighting Conrad? Over that damp piece of forest your grandmother obsessed over? Yes. Then you've already lost, Coralie said. Don't come here. There's nothing I can do for you. Arlo Beckett gave me the promissory note, I said, my voice dropping. The one you signed 10 years ago. The proxy debt. Silence on the line. The background noise of the television cut out abruptly. How did you get that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My grandmother left it in a lockbox. She planned for this. But the debt is in your name. I need your signature to call it in. If I don't get it, he takes the land, and I lose everything. I could hear her breathing. A slow, ragged inhale. 1142 East Marigold Way, she finally said. It's in Mesa. Don't expect a guest room. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and took a deep breath. Getting the address was the easy part. The hard part was the 1,100 miles between the Oregon coast and Mesa, Arizona. I opened the Maps app on my phone. 19 hours and 40 minutes, assuming no traffic. I looked at my banking app again. Still zero. I had a quarter tank of gas in the Hyundai. That might get me to Eugene. I left the school and drove straight to my apartment. I grabbed a laundry basket and started filling it with anything I owned that had a plug or a brand name. My 4-year-old laptop, a decent acoustic guitar I hadn't played since college, a vintage KitchenAid mixer my grandmother had given me when I moved out on my own. I carried the heavy basket out to the car, my boots splashing in the muddy puddles of my driveway. I drove to a pawn shop on the edge of town, a cinder block building with bars on the windows and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry wasp. The guy behind the counter, a heavy-set man wearing a name tag that read Jasper, looked through my basket with absolute boredom. 50 for the guitar, Jasper said, tapping the soundboard. Bridge is lifting. It's a solid spruce top, I said. It's $50, he countered, not looking up. I'll do 100 for the mixer. Laptop's useless to me. Operating system is too old to update. I'll give you 20 for it as for parts. I need 400, I said. Jasper pushed the basket back across the glass counter. Then you're in the wrong store. Sweetheart, 170 for the lot. Take it or leave it. I took it. He handed me a thin stack of $20 bills. It felt like I was holding the last few hours of my life in my hands. I hit the road at 5 in the evening. The Oregon rain turned into a blinding, torrential downpour as I merged onto I-5 South. The Hyundai's wipers squeaked furiously across the glass, doing a terrible job of clearing the windshield. My heater, which had been limping along for months, finally gave up entirely somewhere past Medford. The vents just blew damp, freezing air into the cabin. I drove in my winter coat, a scarf wrapped tight around my neck, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't stop for a motel. I couldn't afford one. Around 2 in the morning, exhausted and shivering, I pulled into a rest stop in Northern California. I locked the doors, cracked a window an inch to keep the condensation down, and curled up in the back seat under a cheap fleece blanket. I slept for 3 hours, woke up with a stiff neck and a headache pounding behind my eyes. I ate a stale granola bar from my glove compartment, bought a burnt cup of coffee from a vending machine, and got back on the highway. The landscape slowly bled from deep green pines to golden hills, and then, eventually, to flat-baked desert. By the time I crossed into Arizona, my car's temperature gauge was hovering dangerously close to the red zone. I had to turn off the AC, which barely worked anyway, and roll down the windows, letting the oven-hot air blast my face. My clothes stuck to my skin. The $170 from the pawn shop had dwindled to $24. Mesa was a sprawling grid of beige stucco, asphalt, and strip malls. The sun was sitting heavy and low on the horizon when I finally turned onto Marigold Way. Number 1142 was a single-story ranch house that looked like it hadn't been painted since the 90s. The front yard was entirely gravel, decorated with a few struggling cacti and a rusted wheelbarrow. A faded blue Ford pickup sat in the cracked concrete driveway. I parked the Hyundai on the street. My legs were shaking when I stepped out of the car. I hadn't seen my mother in 14 years. The last memory I had of her was the back of her head as she loaded 2 suitcases into a taxicab. I walked up the concrete path. The screen door was patched with silver duct tape. I knocked. A dog barked sharply inside. A man's voice yelled, "Quiet, Boomer." Footsteps approached. The wooden inner door swung open. A man in his 50s stood there, wearing a grease-stained t-shirt and jeans. He had a graying goatee and held a beer can in one hand. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my wrinkled clothes. "You selling something?" he asked. "I'm looking for Coralie," I said. "Who wants her?" "Her daughter." The man blinked. He looked back over his shoulder into the dim house, then back at me. "She didn't say nothing about a kid coming over. She knows I'm here. Can you just tell her Tess is outside?" He grunted, leaving the door open, and walked away. A few seconds later, I heard the faint sound of arguing from the back of the house. Hushed, sharp voices. Then, Coralie appeared. She looked small. That was the first thing that struck me. When you're 12, your parents seem larger than life. Standing in the doorway at 26, I realized my mother was barely 5'3". Her hair, which used to be a dark, glossy brown, was dyed a harsh, brassy blonde, and pulled back in a messy clip. Her skin was deeply lined from the desert sun. She wore a faded waitress uniform, a pink polo shirt and black slacks. She pushed open the screen door and stepped out onto the concrete porch. She pulled a pack of generic cigarettes from her pocket, tapped one out, and lit it. She took a long drag, exhaled a cloud of gray smoke, and finally looked at me. "You look like her," Coralie said. She didn't mean herself. She meant my grandmother. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Let's not do that. Thad gets weird about family drama, and I've had a 10-hour shift at the diner. You said you have the papers. Let me see them." I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I handed it to her. She didn't invite me inside. We stood on the porch in the 90-degree heat as she slid the promissory note out and read it over. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, lingering on her own chairman's signature at the bottom. She took another drag of her cigarette. Arlo kept the books clean, she muttered. I'll give him that. Conrad used the access road as collateral for a private equity loan, I explained, keeping my voice steady. When the zoning board rejected his golf course, he defaulted. If we don't call in this debt right now, a Chicago firm takes the road and bleeds the trust dry. The land goes to auction. Coralie folded the document and slid it back into the envelope. She tapped the envelope against her leg, staring out at the gravel yard. No, she said. I stared at her. What? I said no. I'm not signing a call option, Tess. I'm not initiating a foreclosure on Conrad Whitmore. You have to, I said, stepping closer. It's the only way to save the sanctuary. My grandmother set this up specifically so. Your grandmother set this up to protect herself. Coralie snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. She threw her half-smoked cigarette onto the gravel and crushed it under her shoe. You think this was some brilliant chess move? You think she handed me 50 grand out of the goodness of her heart just to keep a secret? Arlo said she used you as a proxy because you were legally severed from Conrad's businesses. Arlo is an accountant, Coralie said bitterly. He only sees the math. Did he tell you when I signed that paper? 10 years ago, I said. Exactly 10 years ago, Coralie said, stepping toward me. The smell of stale smoke and old perfume hit me, right in the middle of my custody battle with Conrad. Right when I was trying to get you out of that house, I froze. What custody battle? You left. I left because Conrad's lawyers threatened to drag my name through the mud and have me arrested for embezzlement, she said, her voice shaking with sudden, raw anger. He funneled money from his failing strip malls into my personal checking account without telling me, then used the bank records to prove to the family court judge that I was an unfit, criminal mother. He was going to put me in jail. Tess, my stomach turned over. I thought back to being 12 years old, the hushed arguments, the sudden disappearance of my mother's clothes from the closet, the way Conrad used to smile at me, a tight, cold smile, telling me my mother just couldn't handle responsibility. I didn't have a lawyer, Coralie continued, her eyes wet. I didn't have a dime. I was packing my bags, terrified I was going to prison. And then your grandmother showed up. Coralie held up the manila envelope. She didn't come to help me fight him. She came with a deal. She told me she would pay off Conrad's debt to the credit union so he wouldn't go bankrupt, but she needed a proxy. She said if I signed this note and walked away, if I dropped the custody suit and left the state, she would give me $50,000 in cash, and she would make sure Conrad's embezzlement charges against me disappeared. I couldn't speak. The heat radiating off the concrete porch felt suffocating. She bought me off, Tess, Coralie whispered. She paid me to abandon you, so she could have you all to herself. She wanted a protege for her little forest, and Conrad didn't care about you anyway, so she bought you. And she used this exact debt to do it. She shoved the envelope back into my chest. I grabbed it mechanically. So don't ask me to execute a legal document that your grandmother used to ruin my life, Coralie said. I am not getting involved with Conrad again. I am not poking that bear. He has more money and more lawyers than God, and if I try to bankrupt him, he will find a way to destroy me. And Thad. And whatever miserable little life I've scraped together down here. She turned around and grabbed the handle of the screen door. Mom, please, I said, my voice cracking. Conrad froze my bank accounts. I have $24 to my name. I slept in my car last night. If you don't sign this, I have nowhere to go. He takes everything. Coralie stopped. She didn't turn around. I saw her shoulders tense under the thin fabric of her uniform. I'm sorry, Tess, she said quietly. I really am, but you shouldn't have come here. She opened the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind her. The deadbolt clicked into place. It was a sharp, heavy sound that seemed to echo in the dead, hot air of the porch. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the silver duct tape peeling off the screen door. The sun was dropping below the roofline, casting long, bruised shadows across the gravel yard. From inside the house, the dog started barking again, followed by Thad's muffled shout. Then, just the drone of a window AC unit kicking into overdrive. I turned around and walked back to my car. The driver's seat burned through my jeans when I sat down. I put my head against the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I was too dehydrated, too exhausted, and mostly just too empty. The foundation I had built the last 12 years of my life on had just been kicked out from under me. My grandmother, the woman who taught me how to read pH levels in soil samples, the woman who sat with me on the porch in the rain, drinking cheap tea, telling me that we were the stewards of the land. She hadn't just saved me from a broken home. She had orchestrated it. She had weaponized Conrad's crimes to buy out my mother's custody rights, all because she wanted an heir who would care about the aquifer. I was an investment. I turned the key. The Hyundai sputtered, then caught. The temperature gauge immediately started creeping upward. I drove exactly 2 miles before the car started violently shuddering. I pulled into the parking lot of a massive, sterile grocery store and killed the engine just as a faint wisp of steam hissed from under the hood. I had $24. I walked into the air-conditioned blast of the store. The fluorescent lights were blinding. I bought a gallon jug of distilled water, a loaf of store-brand white bread, and a jar of peanut butter. It cost me $8.40. I carried my plastic bag back out to the car. I popped the hood, burning my fingers on the metal latch, and poured half the water into the coolant reservoir. I drank the other half sitting on the curb, watching the parking lot slowly empty out as night fell. I slept in the front seat with the doors locked and the windows cracked half an inch. The Arizona heat didn't break. It just settled into a thick, suffocating blanket. Every time I drifted off, I woke up panicked, thinking about the Chicago private equity firm, thinking about the toll gate going up on Route 11, thinking about Conrad sitting in his leather chair, checking my bank balance, knowing I was starving. At 6 a.m., the sun came up like a hammer. My phone had 14% battery left. I plugged it into the cigarette lighter adapter, turned the key to accessory mode, and called Arlo. He answered on the second ring. Tess, where are you? I'm in Mesa, I said. My voice sounded sounded like crushed glass. I cleared my throat. I found her. And she told me no, I said. And she told me why she signed the proxy in the first place. There was a heavy, static-filled silence on the line. Arlo, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Did you know my grandmother used that debt to force Coralie to abandon her custody rights? Arlo sighed. It was the same tired sound he had made in the diner back in Oregon. Your grandmother was a complicated woman, Tess. She loved that coastline more than she loved most people. When Conrad started threatening to put Coralie in jail, your grandmother saw a way to solve two problems at once. She kept Conrad out of bankruptcy, and she got you away from him. She bought me, I said. She protected you, Arlo corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. She knew Conrad would ruin you, just like he ruins everything he touches. She gave Coralie an out, and Coralie took it. That was Coralie's choice. Conrad framed her for embezzlement, I said. He used the strip mall money to make her look like a criminal in family court. I know, Arlo said quietly. I saw the ledgers. It was a neat piece of forensic accounting on his part. He manufactured a paper trail that pointed directly to her checking account. And you didn't say anything? You didn't testify for her? I worked for your grandmother, Tess, not Coralie. And your grandmother told me to keep my mouth shut. If we had exposed Conrad in court, the credit union would have seized the 400 acres. The land would have been sold to developers a decade ago. Your grandmother sacrificed Coralie to save the sanctuary. And to save you. I squeezed my eyes shut. The headache from yesterday was back, pounding behind my temples. Well, her sacrifice backfired. Because Coralie won't sign the call option. She's terrified of Conrad. She wants nothing to do with him or his debt. If she doesn't sign, the Chicago firm takes the road in 12 days, Arlo said. I know the timeline, Arlo. Then you need to make her understand the math, Arlo said, his tone shifting, becoming more clinical. If Coralie calls in the debt, she initiates the foreclosure on Vanguard Logistics. She takes control of the holding company. Do you understand what that means? She wouldn't just be saving your road. She would legally own a $3 million asset. She's working in a diner. Tess, tell her she can sell the easement to the Tillamook Trust for $1 million cash. We can raise that kind of money if the land is secure. She doesn't care about the money, I said. She cares about not going to jail. She thinks if she pokes Conrad, he'll reopen the old embezzlement framing. He can't, Arlo said sharply. The statute of limitations on civil fraud in Nevada is 3 years. Criminal is 5. It's been 10. He can't touch her. He has no leverage over her anymore. You have to tell her that. I looked at the dashboard clock. 6:15 a.m. I'll try, I said, and hung up. I ate 2 slices of dry bread with peanut butter. I brushed my teeth using a bottle of water over a storm drain in the parking lot. I changed into a clean, slightly wrinkled t-shirt from my laundry basket, put my hair up in a clip, and started the car. It took me an hour to find the diner Coralie worked at. It was a sprawling 50s-themed joint just off the highway. All chrome siding and red vinyl booths. It looked identical to a dozen other places I had passed on the drive down. I parked the Hyundai in the back, near the dumpsters, hoping the shade would keep the engine cool. I walked through the double glass doors. The breakfast rush was in full swing. The air smelled of bacon grease, spilled syrup, and burnt filter coffee. I scanned the floor. Coralie was balancing a massive tray with 4 plates of eggs and hash browns on her shoulder. She looked exhausted, moving with a stiff mechanical efficiency. I slid into an empty booth in the far corner, next to the restrooms. I didn't look at a menu. A few minutes later, a young waitress with a name tag that read Nadia came over with a coffee pot. Morning. Just coffee to start? Yes, please, I said. Actually, is Coralie working this section? Nadia glanced over her shoulder. No, she's in section 3. You need her? I'm a friend of the family, I lied. Just wanted to say hi. I'll tell her you're here. Nadia poured my coffee and walked away. I sat there with both hands wrapped around the thick ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my palms. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Coralie appeared at the edge of my table. She didn't have her order pad out. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were hard. I told you not to come here, she said, keeping her voice low. I didn't have anywhere else to go, I said. My accounts are frozen. I slept in a Walmart parking lot. Coralie looked away, staring a hole into the laminated dessert menu sitting on the edge of the table. I can give you $100 for gas. That gets you back to Oregon. I'm not leaving without the signature. She put her hands on the table and leaned in. Listen to me, Tess. Thad asked me about you last night. He asked what was in the envelope. I told him it was junk mail from an old estate lawyer. If he finds out I'm sitting on $3 million in paper debt, he will lose his mind. We're 2 months behind on the mortgage. He'll make me call it in just to get a payout. Then let him, I said. Call it in. Arlo said the trust can buy the easement from you for $1 million once the road is secure. You could pay off your house. You could leave Thad if you wanted to. Coralie let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. You think it's that easy? You think Conrad will just write a check and surrender? If I file that paperwork, his lawyers will come down here and bury me. He'll drag up the embezzlement. He'll put me in a courtroom. He can't, I said, leaning forward to match her intensity. Arlo checked. The statute of limitations expired 5 years ago. He can't prosecute you for the strip malls, Mom. He has nothing on you. You're completely safe. Coralie froze. Her eyes darted to mine. For a second, just a fraction of a second, the defensive armor cracked. Expired? 10 years, I said softly. You've been hiding from a ghost for 5 years. He can't touch you, but he is actively destroying me. Right now. He took my bank accounts. He's taking the land. He's going to pave over the aquifer your grandmother spent her whole life protecting. Coralie stood up straight. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at the crowded diner, at the line of people waiting by the host stand, at the grease stains on her shoes. It wasn't just the embezzlement, Tess, she said. Her voice was hollow. I stopped. What do you mean? Your grandmother bought my debt to keep Conrad out of jail. Yes, Coralie said, staring at the floor. And she bought my silence on the custody battle. But she didn't just give me $50,000 to leave. She gave me $50,000 $50,000 to sign the proxy because she knew I had something else. Something Conrad didn't know about. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. What did you have? Coralie finally looked at me. I was his bookkeeper for the first 3 years of his marriage, before things got bad, before he started moving the strip mall money. I set up the original shell companies for him. I know exactly how he structured the Nevada LLCs to default. I stared at her, the pieces slowly clicking into place. You have his original ledgers. I kept copies, Coralie whispered, on a flash drive. When he threatened me with the fake embezzlement charges, I told your grandmother I was going to the FBI with the drive. I was going to burn him down. That's why she stepped in. She didn't just buy my custody rights, Tess. She bought my evidence. She made me hand over the drive in exchange for the 50 grand, and she made me sign the proxy debt as an insurance policy. She held the debt over Conrad, and she held the flash drive over me. I couldn't speak. The sheer, calculating weight of my grandmother's actions pressed down on me. She hadn't just been playing chess with Conrad. She had been holding a gun to both of their heads for a decade, perfectly balancing their mutual destruction to keep her 400 acres of trees safe. Where is the drive now? I asked. She took it, Coralie said. I never saw it again. And if I sign that proxy note, Conrad won't just come after me with civil suits. He knows I set up the original companies. If he realizes I'm the one calling in the debt, he'll know your grandmother must have kept the drive. He'll tear apart everything to find it. And when he does, he'll make sure I go down with him as a co-conspirator. He framed you, I said. I set up the shells, Tess, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know what he was going to use them for, but my name is on the original incorporation papers. The FBI doesn't care about the nuance of a messy divorce. If that drive sees the light of day, I could still go to federal prison. Statute of limitations on federal wire fraud doesn't apply the same way when offshore accounts are involved. Hey, Coralie, a voice barked from across the diner. The manager, a thick-necked man in a tight polo shirt, was glaring at us from the kitchen window. Table 4 needs their check. You're on the clock. Coralie jumped slightly. She grabbed her order pad. Go back to Oregon, Tess, she said quickly, stepping away from the booth. Let him have the road. Let him build his golf course. It's just dirt. It's not worth going to prison for. She turned and walked quickly toward the kitchen, disappearing behind the swinging metal doors. I sat alone in the booth. My coffee had gone completely cold. It wasn't just a proxy debt anymore. It was a hostage situation. Coralie couldn't sign the paper without exposing herself to a federal investigation, and Conrad couldn't build his resort without destroying the trust. And my grandmother, the architect of this entire stalemate, was dead and buried. I pulled my phone out. I stared at the blank screen. Where is the drive? My grandmother had handed me the fireproof box, 5 years of soil samples, water charters, and legal documents. Arlo had told me about the second envelope, the one with the proxy debt, hidden under the tax receipts. I had emptied that box onto my mattress. There was no flash drive. I thought about her house on the coast, the porch, the rain, the 2 mugs of cheap tea. I stood up, threw a wrinkled dollar bill on the table for the coffee, and walked out of the diner. The Arizona heat hit me like a physical blow, but I felt freezing cold. I got back into the Hyundai. I plugged my phone in again. I dialed Arlo's number. Hello? He answered. Arlo, I said, putting the car in gear. When my grandmother gave you her tax documents every year, did she hand them to you in person? Usually yes, he said, sounding confused. Why? Did she ever give you a flash drive? Arlo hesitated. No, never a flash drive. She preferred paper. She didn't even own a computer. Tess, you know that. I hit the brakes at the edge of the diner parking lot. A delivery truck rattled past on the highway. She didn't own a computer. She didn't even have a router in her house. Arlo, I said, my heart beating faster. If she didn't own a computer, she couldn't have checked the files on the drive Coralie gave her. She wouldn't have known if the drive was real, or if it actually contained the ledgers. I suppose not, Arlo said. But she was thorough. She would have had someone verify it. Who? I asked. She didn't trust anyone but you, and you just said she never gave it to you. Silence on the line. Arlo, who verified the drive? I don't know, Tess, Arlo said slowly. If it wasn't me, and it wasn't her, I looked at the fuel gauge on my dashboard. A quarter tank. Just enough to get me out of Mesa. She didn't verify it, I said, the realization settling into my bones. She never looked at it. She just took it from Coralie, locked it away, and used it as a bluff for 10 years. She bluffed both of them. If she kept it, Arlo said, his voice dropping, she would have put it somewhere safe. Somewhere Conrad couldn't find it when he cleared out the house. He sold her house 3 years ago, I said. He gutted the place. If it was in the floorboards or the walls, his contractors would have found it. Then where is it? I looked at the passenger seat. My canvas tote bag was sitting there, the manila envelope sticking out of the top. I thought about the day she handed me the water rights charter. This gets filed if anyone tries to pave over the springs. I think I know, I said. I need to get back to Oregon. Tess, you don't have the gas money. Your accounts are frozen. I'll figure it out, I said. I have to go. I hung up. I pulled out onto the highway, heading west, away from the diner, away from Coralie. I made it exactly 12 miles before my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Arlo. It was an unknown local Arizona number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, the notification popped up. I tapped it on the screen, holding the phone to my ear as I merged onto the interstate. Tess, a man's voice said. It was thick, slightly slurred, and completely unfamiliar. This is Thad, Coralie's husband. You left something on the porch last night when you came by. I checked my rearview mirror. My stomach tightened. I hadn't left anything on the porch. I don't know what kind of game you're playing with my wife. The voicemail continued, the background noise full of heavy wind like he was driving with the windows down. But I looked up that name on the paper you dropped. Conrad Whitmore. Turns out he's got a big real estate office up in Nevada. And turns out they offer a finder's fee for information regarding hostile legal actions against their properties. Thad laughed. It was an ugly, wet sound. I just got off the phone with his legal team, Tess. They were real interested to hear that Coralie's daughter was down here waving around a $3 million proxy note. They're wiring me 10 grand just for the heads up. And they said they're sending a process server down here today to hand Coralie a cease and desist. The voicemail beeped and cut off. My foot slipped off the gas pedal. The Hyundai slowed down, the semi-truck behind me blaring its horn as it swerved into the left lane. Conrad knew. He didn't know about the flash drive. He didn't know about the ledgers. But he knew Coralie held the proxy debt, and he knew I was trying to activate it. He had outflanked me from 1,000 miles away, using a greedy mechanic with a mortgage problem. If Conrad's lawyers served Coralie with an injunction before she signed the call option, the proxy debt would be tied up in litigation for years, long enough for the Chicago firm to seize the road, long enough to bankrupt the Tillamook Trust. I looked at my GPS. 19 hours back to Oregon, 12 days until foreclosure, and Conrad's lawyers were already boarding a plane to Phoenix. I jerked the steering wheel to the right, cutting off a minivan in the middle lane. The driver laid on the horn, a long, furious blast that faded as I dove down the exit ramp. I hit the brakes at the bottom, my tires skidding slightly on the sandy asphalt, and took a sharp left under the overpass to get back onto the eastbound on-ramp. The gas light dinged, a bright, unblinking yellow icon on the dashboard. I ignored it. I pushed the accelerator down, the Hyundai's engine whining in protest as I merged back into the morning traffic. 19 hours to Oregon didn't matter anymore. If Conrad's lawyers slapped Coralie with an injunction before she signed that call option, the 400 acres were gone. I had to get to her before the process server did, before Thad did. The diner parking lot was still packed when I pulled in. I parked the Hyundai illegally, half on the curb near the dumpsters, leaving the keys in the ignition and the engine running. I sprinted to the glass doors, yanking them open so hard they slammed against the door frames. The morning rush was deafening. Sizzling grease, clattering plates, a baby crying in a booth near the window. I spotted Coralie immediately. She was at the main wait station, punching an order into the glowing POS system. I didn't wait politely. I shoved past a family of 4 waiting for a table and marched straight up to her. "Tess, I swear to God," she started, her finger hovering over the screen. "Thad called me," I said, my voice low and rapid. "He found the name on the envelope. He called Conrad's real estate office in Nevada." Coralie froze. The irritation in her eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, blank confusion. "What are you talking about? He sold you out, Mom. Conrad's lawyers are wiring him 10 grand as a finder's fee. They're sending a process server down here today to hand you a cease and desist. If they serve you before you sign this proxy note, Conrad ties the debt up in court for years. He takes the road, he takes the land, and he takes you down with him anyway." Coralie stared at me, her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The ambient noise of the diner seemed to swell around us. The clinking silverware, the loud laughter from a corner booth, the manager yelling about an order of wheat toast. "No," Coralie said, her voice trembling. "Thad wouldn't do that. He knows how scared I am of Conrad. Thad wants the payout," I said. "He told me on my voicemail. He thinks he just won the lottery." I reached into my tote bag, pulled out the manila envelope, and slapped it down on the steel counter of the wait station. I pulled a blue ballpoint pen from my pocket and set it on top of the envelope. "Sign it," I said. "Right now. We have to get it notarized before the server finds you." Coralie backed away from the counter, shaking her head. "I can't. Tess, if I sign that, the flash drive, my grandmother never looked at the drive," I hissed, leaning in so the other waitresses couldn't hear. "She didn't own a computer, Coralie. She didn't know what was on it. She just locked it away and used it to bluff you into leaving. And I think I know where she hid it. If you sign this, I will find the drive, and I will destroy it. I swear to you. But if you let Conrad serve you today, he wins. He gets everything. He destroys my life, and he ruins yours all over again." Coralie looked at the envelope. Her hands were shaking violently. Before she could speak, the heavy glass doors at the front of the diner swung open. I turned my head. It wasn't a man in a suit with legal papers. It was Thad. He was wearing the same grease-stained jeans from yesterday, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He scanned the crowded room, his gaze sweeping over the booths until he locked eyes with Coralie. A smug, ugly smile spread across his face. "He's here," I whispered. Coralie looked up. All the color drained from her face. She looked at Thad, then down at the envelope, then back at Thad, the man she had spent the last 10 years building a quiet, miserable life with in the desert, the man who had just traded her safety to her abuser for $10,000. "Coralie," Thad called out, weaving his way aggressively through the tables, ignoring the host trying to stop him. "Don't sign a damn thing. The guy from the law firm is meeting us here in 20 minutes. Coralie didn't hesitate. She grabbed the manila envelope and the pen, shoved them into her apron pocket, and grabbed my arm. Her grip was like a vice. "Kitchen," she said. We pushed through the swinging metal doors just as Thad reached the wait station. The kitchen was a narrow, sweltering corridor of stainless steel, open flames, and screaming fry cooks. Coralie didn't stop. She dragged me past the grills, ignoring the manager shouting her name, and slammed her shoulder into the heavy metal exit door at the back. We stumbled out into the blinding Arizona sunlight, right next to the dumpsters where I had parked the Hyundai. The smell of rotting food and hot asphalt hit me in the face. "Get in," Coralie gasped, pulling a set of keys out of her pocket. "That's my car," I said, pointing to the idling Hyundai. "You're out of gas, you idiot," she snapped, pointing to the rusted blue Ford pickup parked 2 spaces down. "Thad took my car this morning. That means he brought the truck." We ran to the truck. Coralie unlocked it, threw the envelope onto the cracked leather bench seat, and climbed behind the wheel. I scrambled into the passenger side, slamming the door shut just as the back exit of the diner burst open. Thad stood in the doorway, his face red with anger. "Coralie, what the hell are you doing?" Coralie jammed the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life, a rough, sputtering sound that sounded like a dying tractor. She threw it in reverse, the tires screeching against the pavement, and backed out so fast my head slammed against the glass of the rear window. Thad lunged forward, slamming his hands onto the hood of the truck. "Turn it off, whore," he yelled, his face pressed dangerously near the windshield. "They're giving us 10 grand. We can pay the mortgage." Coralie stared at him through the glass. Her expression was completely unreadable. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just reached down and shifted the column shifter into drive. She tapped the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, the heavy steel bumper bumping Thad's knees. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock, throwing his hands up in the air. "You crazy bitch," he screamed. Coralie slammed her foot down. We shot out of the parking lot, the back end of the pickup fishtailing slightly as we hit the access road. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She kept her eyes locked on the road ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. We drove in total silence for 5 minutes. The ack in the truck was broken, blowing hot, dusty air directly into my face. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it ached. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "First National Bank on Baseline Road," Coralie said, her voice flat, completely devoid of any emotion. "There's a girl named Marta who works the second window. She owes me a favor. She's a public notary." I looked at her. "You're doing it." Coralie reached over, pulled the manila envelope out of her apron pocket, and tossed it onto my lap. "I'm signing the call option. I'm foreclosing on Conrad's holding company." She took a ragged breath, blinking hard against the glare of the desert sun. "He bought my husband Tess," she whispered. "He reached across 1,000 miles, and he bought my husband for the price of a used car. I'm done running." I opened the envelope. I pulled the promissory note out, smoothing the creased edges on my jeans. I uncapped the blue pen and held it ready. "Marta's shift starts at 9, Coralie said, checking the digital clock on the dashboard. It read 8:42. "We have 18 minutes. If Conrad's lawyers are smart, they didn't just send a process server to the diner. They sent one to the bank, the post office, and anywhere else in Mesa with a notary stamp." She took a hard right onto a wide, sun-baked boulevard lined with palm trees and car dealerships. "Call your accountant," she commanded. "Tell him to draft the foreclosure notice. The second my signature is notarized, I want it filed with the Nevada state courts. I want Conrad's road locked down before lunch." I pulled out my phone. 11% battery. I dialed Arlo. He answered on the first ring. "Tess, draft the paperwork." "Arlo," I said, the adrenaline making my voice shake. "Coralie is signing the note. We're on our way to a notary now." I heard Arlo exhale sharply on the other end of the line, a sound of profound relief. "I have the filings prepared," he said. "I just need a scanned copy of the notarized signature page. I can submit it electronically to the Nevada Chancery Court. Once it's in the system, Vanguard Logistics is legally in receivership. The Chicago equity firm won't be able to touch the road. I'll email you a photo the second she stamps it," I said. "Tess, wait," Arlo said, his tone shifting. It lost the relief. It was suddenly very careful, very measured. "There's a complication." The word hit me like a physical blow. "What complication?" "The statute of limitations is 10 years. You said he can't touch her. He can't touch her criminally," Arlo said. "But I just got an alert from the county clerk's office in Oregon. Conrad's lawyers didn't just file an injunction against Coralie in Arizona. They amended the civil suit against you." I stared at the dashboard. "What did they do?" "They attached a lien to your grandmother's estate," Arlo said quietly. "They are claiming that the proxy debt was purchased using misappropriated funds from Conrad's original businesses. They are arguing that the $3 million belongs to him, not the proxy." "That's a lie," I said, my voice rising in the small cabin of the truck. "My grandmother paid the credit union out of her own pocket. You have the ledgers." "I do," Arlo said. "But civil courts take time, Tess. If the judge grants a temporary restraining order on the proxy debt, the foreclosure is halted until the origin of the funds is proven. And the hearing for that restraining order is scheduled for 1:00 p.m. today. In Oregon." I looked at the clock. 8:46 I'm in Arizona. 8:46 I'm in Oregon. "That's 4 hours," I said, panic clawing at my throat. "Arlo, we're 19 hours away." "I know," Arlo said. "I can't represent you in court, Tess. I'm an accountant, not an attorney. You don't have legal representation on file. If you don't have a lawyer standing in front of that judge at 1 p.m. to contest the restraining order, the judge will grant it by default. Conrad freezes the debt, the Chicago firm takes the road next week, and everything we just did is useless." Arlo's voice was flat, tired, and completely devoid of panic. He didn't sound like a man delivering a death blow. He sounded like an accountant reading an inventory list. "I know it's 4 hours, Tess," Arlo said, "and I know you're in Arizona, but I also know the county judge in Tillamook, Judge Sterling. He sits on the bench every Tuesday afternoon at 1300 hours sharp. He hates sloppy motions, he hates bullies, and he hates Conrad Whitmore." "Arlo, I don't have a lawyer," I said, my voice cracking as I watched Coralie shift the truck into park outside the tan stucco walls of the First National Bank. "You said it yourself. Conrad's lawyers are going to walk in there with a stack of paper an inch thick. If nobody stands up and says this is a fraudulent injunction, Judge Sterling will sign it, because nobody is there to object. Then you find someone to stand up," Arlo said. "Who?" "I have $24 and my car is overheating in a strip mall parking lot. Call Lachlan," Arlo said simply. I paused, my hand resting on the passenger door handle. "Who the hell is Lachlan?" "Lachlan Farrow," Arlo said. "Your grandmother's real estate attorney in Tillamook. The man who drafted the original trust papers 12 years ago. He retired 2 years ago, but he still has an office above the hardware store on Main Street. He hates Conrad more than your grandmother did. Call him, Tess. Tell him Arlo sent you, and tell him the proxy debt is active. He'll put on a jacket and walk down to the courthouse." "Are you sure?" "He's 82 years old and he plays chess by mail," Arlo said. "He's been waiting 12 years for an excuse to tear into Conrad's legal filings. Call him now. I'll email the notarized document to his office the second Marta stamps it." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." okay. And Tess? Arlo added before I could hang up. Don't look at the dashboard temperature gauge, just drive. I killed the call as Coralie cut the engine. The old Ford truck let out a long, shuddering sigh under the hood, a final puff of gray steam rising past the wipers. We climbed out into the dry, crushing heat of the Mesa morning, walking side by side across the cracked asphalt toward the glass doors of the bank. Marta was behind the second teller window, wearing a neat navy blue blazer and staring tiredly at a stack of deposit slips. When she saw Coralie walking up to the glass, her expression softened into something weary and familiar. Coralie, Marta said, her voice muffled through the security partition. You look like you've seen a ghost. I need a signature notarized, Marta, Coralie said, sliding the manila envelope through the stainless steel tray. And I need it stamped right now. Today's date. Official seal. Marta didn't ask questions. She pulled the document out, flipped to the final page where Coralie's signature line waited, and checked the ID Coralie slid across the counter. Her hands moved with practiced, mechanical efficiency, the unblinking click of the date stamper, the heavy thud of the embosser pressing the gold seal into the thick bond paper. Done, Marta said, sliding it back. Keep your head down today, Coralie. I heard things this morning. Thanks, Marta, Coralie murmured. We walked back out to the truck in silence. I pulled my phone out with 2% battery remaining, opened the camera app and framed the notarized page under the harsh desert sun. The image captured the raised metallic seal, the wet blue ink of Coralie's signature, and the sharp timestamp of the bank's clock in the corner of the frame. I hit send to Arlo. The progress bar crawled across the screen for 3 agonizing seconds before the screen flashed. Message sent. Then the phone screen went entirely black. Battery dead. I looked at Coralie. She was gripping the steering wheel of the truck, staring out through the dusty windshield at the empty street. It's done, I said. Coralie closed her eyes for a long moment, her shoulders dropping an inch. Is it? Arlo has the copy, I said. Lachlan Farrow is walking into Judge Sterling's courtroom right now. Conrad doesn't know what hit him. Coralie turned the key. The truck started with a familiar rattling cough. She didn't head back toward the diner. She pointed the nose of the Ford west, toward the highway that led out of Mesa toward the open desert. Where are we going? I asked. We're going to my sister's place in Tucson, Coralie said quietly. For a few days, until Thad stops calling my phone. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap. The tension in my chest didn't vanish. It just shifted, settling into a heavy, quiet certainty. I didn't care about the $24 in my wallet, or the flooded basement in Oregon, or the dented bumper on the Hyundai sitting back behind the diner. The 400 acres were pine trees and granite and cold spring water, running down from the hills toward the Pacific. My grandmother had spent 40 years walking those trails, and 12 years building a cage to keep the world away from them. The road was sealed. The water was protected. And for the first time in 6 years, my mother was sitting next to me with her hands on the wheel, driving away from the men who thought they owned everything.